Greetings, everyone. It is I, Tentus Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome back to the Sixth World. Yes, we're talking about Shadowrun today some more. We're diving back into the Sixth World, and today I thought I'd start a series of videos that I don't know how many of these I'm going to do, I don't know what form they're going to take, but effectively, when it comes to the Sixth World, certainly, like, I had a video all about Seattle. Seattle being a very important and major city in the Sixth World. If you haven't checked it out, I'd recommend seeing that. It was one of my previous Shadowrun videos. Anyway, I'll probably try to remember to throw the link in the description below. I'll try to remember to do that. The world as it is still got a lot of variety to it, and a lot of the cultures are similar to what we know here, but things have broken up, changed. Countries have rechanged their borders. Things have developed in a lot of interesting and different ways. So there is a lot to the world that makes it different. And I thought talking about some of these places and locations might be interesting, because you can learn a little bit more about the Sixth World and how it's advanced. And certainly, like, yes, I could have long videos talking about the various different mega corporations, the ones that historically existed and the ones that exist nowadays, because that's also a major semi-antagonistic force within the world. And again, corporate sovereignty is a thing that exists, so it might be also something to think about and talk that way. But that might be after I go over the basic countries, because as much as mega corporations have a lot of power and influence, and they do, most of them still don't necessarily have full control over things like, I don't know, countries. Most countries at least have sovereignty and some power to them. Could they compete with the megacorp? Yes and no. Certainly what we're going to talk about today can give a megacorp a run for its money, especially if it's just one versus one. We're going to be talking about the United Canadian American States, the U.C.A.S. That's what we're going to dive into today. It is the shadow of what is, or what was, the USA. What we know of the USA in the world of Shadowrun, this is what's left of it. That's the best way to describe it. A lot of what is the U.S. has broken away from it from various events that have happened. Their territory shrunk. The main bits that are left are still relatively strong, and that's why we'll dive into it. So, I'm using a number of sources today. I have looked into some books. The main book, let me go through these books that I am going through. These are very tiny pictures, but hopefully are the best you could do. Let me throw myself over here. Get these pictures up and running for you to see here and talk about these books. So here is the big book that I will be referencing here to a good degree. It provides a little bit of information on the United Canadian American States. This is, of course, the Portfolio of a Dragon, Dracovin Secrets. So there's a section where I'm going to be kind of switching off. I'm also going to be using the Shadowrun Wiki, which is a good point to point out a lot of these books. I'm going to be using sections of both of those mainly for today. But other books that you can look into are, of course, The Year of the Comet provides some information. I should tell you the editions that these are, so you know how old and or how easy they are to find. Sorry. The A Year of the Dragon is for 2nd edition. So the Portfolio of a Dragon, Dracovin Secrets 2nd edition, came out in '96. There is a online version of it if you want to look into it. The Year of the Comet was for 3rd edition, which is this one here. And the last one, which is also for 3rd edition, is Corporate Download. Here you go. So those 3 books provide most of the information you have. Other books that might have some information on the U.C.A.S. 2nd edition has some stuff. Target Matrix, London Sourcebook, German Sourcebook mentions some things. Tiernog book. Target U.C.A.S. is a book that has stuff. Has 4 pages on there. Blood in the Boardroom, Target Matrix, the Gomorrah 15th edition, 2053. Target Smuggler's Haven, and Underworld Sourcebook. So those are all the books you can look into if you are trying to find stuff. A lot of these are unfortunate older editions where they go over a lot of the basics that are there. There are some other links and books that you can look into for finding out information, but those are the main ones I wanted to throw out here and talk about. So, and as I said, this book here, Portfolio of a Dragon, that one I've got a PDF of it open and ready to speak. Let's take a look here at our good old flag for the United Canadian American States. This is the, as of the 2070s, current flag. Okay, I'm going to say that now. So, in the U.C.A.S., it's a federal republic. It's in North America. It's from Atlantic to the beginning of the Rocky Mountains. It is technically the successor to the United States and what's left of Canada. It shares borders with the countries of Quebec, the Algonquin, Manitou, the Sault, the Pueblo, and the Canadian American States. I'm sorry, not the Canadian, the CAS, the Confederation of American States. Not to be confused with Confederate American States. That is a confusion that exists, and I will tell you when I talk about the CAS, it's actually an insult to call them Confederates. It's a confederation. That's an entirely different story for another day. So, Seattle is technically a state. I talked about them. It's on the West Coast, and it's an enclave in the South Shide territory. So, there are 31 states with local autonomy according to the system of federalism, and of course the Federal District of Columbia, encompassing the Washington, D.C. The Metroplex of Seattle is its own state, and it's very unique. It's got all the other parts of the rest of the states, but it is smaller. A UCAS citizen can be referred to as an American, a Canadian, a UCASer, or Canadian American. All those are technically acceptable because, again, it's a successor to both America and Canada combined together. So, as I said, capital is Washington, D.C. Honestly, we'll talk about Washington a little bit, but that's the federal district around it before the end of today. But that's to keep in mind. It's representative democracy. It's overseen by a president. The current one, as of I believe 2078, which is the year that is present in 6th edition, the president is Angela Colton, which, to note, is not the first woman to be president of the UCAS. That was Betty Jo Pritchard, but she got kind of placed in there after a canceled election. She held office. Angela Colton here is the first woman to be elected president of the union. So, we can talk about her for briefly, just to give you an idea of the current president. She was a brigadier general under Kyle Hefner, who was the successor to Dunkelzane when Dunkelzane was assassinated. So he was the shortest lived, basically, or the shortest vice president of all. President Colton basically was the one that was in charge of, if you saw my Seattle episode, taking care of things with Renraku archaeology. She was a commander in the Joint Task Force Seattle, and when the shit went down in Renraku, she stayed in command during the entire operation from 2060 to 2063, taking control of Renraku. So she got special decoration. In 2064, she managed to counter a coup against the UCAS federal government. President Kyle Hefner was basically kidnapped and then was killed in attempts to rescue Kyle Hefner. There was some confusion stuff what happened, but basically, if it wasn't for Colton, there would have been a successor. Who actually shot the president at the time, President Hefner? That's a question. Some blame Colton for it. Some blame the people that were trying to do the coup. It's very unknown who fired the shot which killed them. But basically, still nonetheless, she had a victory in 2068 later on. Basically, she countered the incumbent president, who was kind of seen as a pawn of megacorp interests. Since then, she has been out. It's considered that she's probably a Republican candidate, as she was in with the politics of the Seattle Republican Party. And I will tell you, there's different versions of all the politics have changed. Though there are still Republicans and Democrats. They're very different than they were during our time period. But also, she is currently the 11th president? 11th president. Now, there's still a lot of people. There's 172 million people in the United Canadian American States. Now, considering that the U.C.A.S. is the majority of areas that were heavily populated. It's the northeast U.S. into bits of the Midwest, and a big chunk of the northern edge of Canada. And then when the Native American nations basically took over things and kicked a lot of people out, a lot of people moved in. So it sounds like a huge number, but it's two countries combined, and a lot of shit's happened, went down over the years, and populations have gone up and down, and stuff has happened. Currently, if you're looking for price, 4 U.C.A.S. dollars is about 1 million. So if you have 100 million, you have 400 U.C.A.S. dollars. Alright, let's talk a little bit about the history of the U.C.A.S. So I'm going to switch over from this flag to the original flag of the U.C.A.S. This is the first flag they started with when they changed and became a joint nation. So, things basically came into effect starting with the Treaty of Denver in 2018. As I talked about in my history video, that was when the combined Native American nations basically won their war against the U.S., when most of Canada and about one-third of the U.S. are succeeded to Native American nations. It was about 12 years after that that we have Union Day, on October 15th, where what was left of Canada, which had been struggling along with what's left of the United States, basically merged together, and we have the resulting U.C.A.S. In 2032, the next big event was the Euro Wars were going on, so then U.C.A.S. forces based in Europe, basically the evolved forces of the United States, withdrew. 2034, 4 years after the forming, is when the Confederation of American States basically succeeded. The southern states of the U.C.A.S. succeeded, they formed it. The Treaty of Richmond was signed. It was a treaty basically splitting things. It's 13 former states of the United Canadian American States: Alabama, Arkansas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia created the Confederation. So they split away in 2034. 2036, California had left. And this is also noting that 2017, Hawaii has succeeded in the Kingdom of Hawaii, so Hawaii's already been gone. Other big events were, of course, Chicago overrun with spirit bugs in 2056. The 2056 president election being overturned because of evidence of fraud was declared. The election was declared invalid by Congress, fairly unanimously. Unanimously? God, I can't speak English today. Unanimous. And then a new election took place in 8 months. And 2057, Dunkelzane was elected president on the 7th, and on the 9th, he was assassinated by a car bomb. On the 10th, Kyle Hefner was sworn in as replacement, and Nadia DeVere becomes vice president. In 2061, Ghostwalker emerges in the Federal District of Columbia. Ghostwalker being a great dragon. Just to note that. And Ghostwalker has some issues with other dragons. You know, he appeared in astral form in 2061 from the rift there at the site of Dunkelzane's death. So he is a character to talk about. Because also he could totally be the Earthdawn Fourth World Dragon Icewing. Cough, 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 cough. Because, you know, that's a thing to talk about because they're technically connected but not connected. I've talked about that before, but it's a thing. Anyway, Also, other events that happen is the New Revolution tries to take control of the government in 2064, which I talked about there, which led to our current president of the UCAS. New Revolution was the group that was leading the effective charge there, and was unsuccessful in their coup. Sucks to be them. God. I forgot these pages take up a bajillion space. So just do that. Sorry. Anyway. Okay. So that's a little bit of basics on the history of the UCAS. If this would behave with me, and my sites would. Oh, there we go. Thank you for working again. Don't worry about it. We'll get it functioning. Technical delays on my end. I could switch over images and I could start working on the next one. That might be nice. Why don't we do that and talk a little bit about... Before we talk about locations, we can talk about the other presidents, since we do have the 11th president already. I've talked about some of these in my history video, because again, the United States, or the U.C.A.S, has had a very central role in a lot of history in the Sixth World. So certainly a lot of things have happened because of them. Certainly a lot could be pointed out that are at fault for it. I might crash something here. I'll just do some things to improve some weird issues that I'm getting. Hey there, I crashed the chat box. Well, we'll reload that in a second. Can I switch this image? Is it going to behave itself? Maybe. We'll see. I can switch the image that I want to. I love technical issues, you know? That happen. I'll switch the image in a minute here when things seem to settle down. But let's talk about the UCAS federal government. Because a snapshot of the UCAS federal government is in the Portfolio of the Dragon book. Because this Portfolio of the Dragon book is indeed a second edition book, but it takes place and was published around the beginning of the third edition. And third edition is when we get the assassination of Dunkelzane and a lot of changes there, because that's the 2050s into the 2060s. That's when we swoop ahead to the 2070s, and 2078 being the sixth edition. We don't go quite that 10-year gap that a lot of times a lot of these editions actually go to. So I can kind of talk about, using the information here, a little bit of a snapshot of what the government at the time was, but it also gives you an idea about what the format of the government was. So of course you have your president and vice president, and at the time of the book here, it was of course Kyle Hafner and Nadja Devar. Yes, restore this tab. Thank you. Other groups are, of course, there's the Speaker of the House, President Pro Tem of the Senate, Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Attorney General, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Business, Secretary of Resources, Secretary of Human Resources. You can see there's a very Surgeon General, Secretary of Information. There was a Scots Commission on the Assassination of Marshal Dr. Mike Henson. The various appointees. Effectively, there's a House. There's a Senate, and they function very much so like our House and Senate are today. There are two senators, and then, of course, a number of... Oh, it's working now, hopefully? Yeah, there we go. There's the North America. I actually want this one. It's a better image. Bigger image. We'll do this one for this one here. Here is North America as the borders are, so you can kind of see how they function between all the different new countries that exist in here. Functioning-ish. What was I saying? I was saying that, yeah, it's an interesting thing to see that, like, our government as we know it is most of what makes up the new version of it in the U.C.A.S. It was a succession of our version of Congress and stuff that exists. And there wasn't... It's not that there wasn't some things taken in the new constitution for the new country. Certainly there was. But it wasn't as much and as strong as you would think. From Canada, unfortunately for them. Most major megacorporations have a presence in U.C.A.S. Ares Macrotechnology, Dracovin Institutes, Draco Foundation, Novatech, Renrenku Computer Systems, USA Autonomics, and there is also U.C.A.S Online and Novatech working a patriotism angle. U.C.A.S Online is a AA mega corporation, is the largest matrix service provider in the world, with over 20 million users worldwide, in all branches of the world. So that is a one to talk about. There's also a newer religion to talk about because, as much religions do stick around, Prince Edward Island hosts the first and largest temple of the dragon, with other temples in Washington, D.C., Boston, St. Louis, and elsewhere. There are laws regarding magical use, and in Cumberland, Kentucky, where a halcyon was discovered after Halley's Comet's visit. There are shadow nodes in New York, Boston, Halifax, and the Federal District of Columbia. Several major smuggling routes go through the U.C.A.S, and mafia influence is the main influence in the country. Out of all of the major criminal organizations, they are the biggest. Let's talk presidents, because we can now, and we're here. So, again, there's been 11 presidents. The first one being Andrew McAllister. He was the U.S. president and provisional one in the U.C.A.S. when it was first combined. The Martin Vincenzo, who's a technocrat party, was the first consolidation ticket of a president and from one party and vice president from another during this time period. There was a Republican VP and a technocrat main one as the first actually elected presidents. Now, that doesn't... Andrew McAllister did get an election cycle once the combination occurred, too. One election. After that, Carl Preston was in charge, followed by Alan Adams, who was a Democrat with a technocrat as a second, who died of a stroke the day after his second inauguration, which then Thomas Steele took over for the rest of the that cycle, and had a technocrat as a VP that they brought in. But both he and his VP were impeached from office after the 2056 election was invalidated. And so Betty Jo Pitchford was president in 2057 under presidential order after removing both president and vice president. Then Dunkel Zame take over, was assassinated. Kyle Hefner took over, had a couple of elections. Gene Simmons became in charge after Kyle Hefner was assassinated and Davier disappeared. So the vice president disappeared, and Gene Simmons, the Senate Senate President pro tempore, became president for a couple of years. And then he was elected properly after that. And then, of course, Angela Colton, our Republican, is the current one. So you can see there are independents that have won. Dunkel Zane was an independent. He managed to do it. But there are three main parties with the Republicans, Democrats, and technocrats still exist. So a third party came into existence in the United Canadian American States. Main office of workplace is, of course, in Washington, D.C., the Federal District. Camp David still exists. But let's talk about Washington, D.C. and the Federal District of Columbia, because those are some important ones to talk about, because we want to talk about what's in the U.C.A.S. And let's switch pictures here before we go over into the depth of this. This is going to be our last picture here because it's going to show off the states. But we're going to dive into here talking about the states. And we're going to do so starting with talking about, of course, the Federal District and Washington, D.C. They're the core of it. So the Federal District, of course, is the capital city administration under the United Canadian American States. It was the previous capital of the United States. The city of Washington, D.C. is the center of the Federal District. The U.S. Federal Capital District Act of 2024 created the Federal District of Columbia by expanding D.C.'s border to the counties of Montgomery, Prince George, Howard, Arlington, Alexandria, and Fairfax. It's basically, in 2024, they created a little state for pretty much the capital reason. There still is the old Federal District, the old Washington, D.C. at the center, which is kind of separated out, but it became much more of a thing there. Yeah. Again, it's got the federal government there. It does have a citywide government there also. There are independent agencies there, and some lobby organizations that have their control there. The Mother of Metahumans headquarters and the People for the Ethical Treatment of the Awakened have headquarters there. Of course, the CIA, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Environmental Protection Agency still exist and have control there. Just noting, Arlington National Cemetery has a magical background count of 4. If you know about magic, that's a thing. And yeah. So, Draco Foundation, Illuminates of the New World have pretty heavy presence there. A lot of corporations have presence in the Federal District of Columbia. The corporate court has an assembly there. So that's actually an important note there, that the corporate court has an embassy there. Since the corporate court is the government of the megatechs, kind of. Or megacorps. Kinda. So, yeah. It has a very high proximity to the U.C.A.S, of course. It's just to the south is North Virginia. There is a presence militarily lie in D.C. because of that. Yeah, it's not like there is huge tension with the U.C.A.S, but, you know, it's sort of like it's still another country. And when the full district kind of state was built, it did take chunks of what was Northern Virginia originally and make it part of the U.C.A.S. So, in the new version of it... Oh, I could probably just throw this image out here for you to see. Let's just do that. Let's do that. See if it pops in there. It kind of there. See, there you go. We'll use this image here. I saw that there was a nice little image here that we could look at. The dark blue green is the Federal District of Columbia. The navy blue was Washington, D.C. That was the original. The light blue is Northern Virginia. The light green is Maryland. The gray is West Virginia, and the red is Virginia. And the light blue is in the North Virginia. The UCA is part of the U.C.A.S. That's the thing is, West Virginia is also in the U.C.A.S. Going back to this map here, you can see West Virginia and Kentucky stayed with the U.C.S. See, that's why you can say things are different than, like, for the CAS. Different sets of states. The majority of the same states joined them, but there were different states that didn't then. Like Kentucky and West Virginia stayed with the UCAS. That's the thing about it. Anyway, so that is the Federal District of Columbia, and of course at the center of it is Washington, D.C. The heart of the U.S., UCAS, still the same capital. The neighborhoods are, of course, Anacostia Barrens, Foggy Bottom, Georgetown, Government Zone, Kansai Village, and Upper Northwest are the main zones of the city itself. The Draco Foundation having their headquarters in Friendship Heights. The Kansai Village. The area is owned and operated by U.C.A.S, and has a global headquarters for U.C.A.S Atomic actually in D.C. That's a kind of interesting thing to note there. It's at the edge of the government zone. Of course, the government still exists. It's bordered to the west by the White House exclusion zone, east by the U.C.A.S Capitol enclosure. Both buildings are actually now heavily fortified and surrounded with walls and barriers to restrict access. It's actually a very important thing to note there that, yes, has changed a lot. Let's talk about the states of the UCAS. So there are states left over from United States and former Canadian provinces. Let's start with the Canadian provinces because there's less of them. There are 5, which in their form, as you can see how they exist, are Manitoba, New Brunswick, and be on the map on that thing there. Actually, wait, can we go to this one? Would this one be better? Yes, it would. Cool. So as I said, we have Manitoba, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, which includes Prince Edward Island, Ontario, and Saskatchewan, as they remain. As said, they send 2 senators and a House delegates dependent on population, very similar to our own. And the American states which join, and again, there are now a total of 31 combined, so it's 26 from the original U.S., along with the 5 Canadian provinces make the 31, which is why I think there are, I think it's the 5 maple leafs and the 26 stars representing on the flag that I showed earlier. Flag. That one there. Yep. I only showed 24. I guess they don't include a star for something like Seattle or something. I don't know. I don't ask questions. But they do have technically 31 states. Technically. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. Okay, because they conclude Seattle. Seattle is technically not... Why is your flag weird? Anyway. We have Connecticut. Of course, still exists. Delaware. Illinois. Indiana. Iowa. Kansas, Kentucky. Maine, which includes the formerly Canadian Newfoundland. So, while Nova Scotia remained its own kind of thing, Newfoundland joined with Maine. Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, North Dakota, still exists, North Missouri, Missouri split in 2, North Virginia, again, the part that stayed with the U.C.A.S, part of New Virginia stayed, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Vermont, Seattle, West Virginia, Wisconsin. So, yeah. I probably can check to see if there's any... Let me just see if there's anything important about any of these states quickly. Before we go on to some cities within these states that we want to talk about, because they're the major cities in the region. I do want to click on some of these just to see what they are. There are stats that you can find. If you want to see things like governor, lieutenant governor, general population of the state, the basic government, what they send to the U.C.A.S, they do provide those. Things like Maryland still have a very impressive population with 53 million people in Maryland and 53 million people in Massachusetts. Those numbers don't look correct. Maybe let me just see. Maybe it would be 53,000. Or that was the original population. Maybe, before everybody went to shit. There are numbers that exist, if you want to look them up for information. Anything in Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey. That's actually surprising little in New Jersey. Oh, there was the massive earthquake in 2005, which collapsed a lot of the economy of New York and forcing the police to go under the corporate council rulership, basically, for a little brief. Oh, hey. And there's a little bit on North Dakota. There's actually something on one of these states. Like, you know, sometimes finding information is a question for when you're doing. We can talk about North Virginia, too. Ohio had the New Vision's firebombing in 2063. New Century Party is the main political party in Ohio. Dakota's an important language actually in South Dakota, turns out, you know. The Wisconsin Dells area is known for many anti-establishment enclaves that tend to help out smugglers known as bug zappers along the route between Minneapolis and Chicago. They have safe roofs in the area. Its largely intact nature and wide terrain makes it semi-stunning natural beauty and admired by many travelers, illicit in otherwise. Interstates 90, 94 cross the state. Madison and Milwaukee are two major cities, of course, in Wisconsin. It's known as arch-conservative territory, is Wisconsin. Wow. So I have some information on Wisconsin. It's for weird that, like, you know, sometimes I have information on some of these states. Okay, let's start with North Virginia because it's very small. It was the Treaty of Virginia. It's a buffer zone, so this was formed from the original Virginia. It's the counties of Alexander, Arlington, and Fairfax. Which had become the part of the federal district. The remaining counties north of the Rappahannock River formed North Virginia. Fredericksburg, located on the river, became the new state's capital. So basically, everything north of the Rappahannock, because part of the counties had been assimilated into the new federal district of the federal district as it formed. The state borders the Potomac River to the north, the Rappahannock to the south, and West Virginia to the west. There have been some attempts to secede from the U.C.A.S. to the C.A.S. But it hasn't happened. It's a popular issue. It's probably not going to go away anytime soon. It's just that, you know, a lot of things have happened that, you know, they still feel connected to their old Virginia roots, I guess, you know, because they are technically originally part of Virginia. Anyway. Nothing major on North Dakota that's more recent things. Let's talk about some cities that still exist, because that's probably a good thing to list, and I'm going to try not to dive too deep into any of these cities, but we'll kind of go over some major cities that exist. Boston is still a major city, of course it is. It's the capital and largest city in Massachusetts in the U.C.A.S. It's actually the largest population center in the Northeast Metroplex axis, and the business and cultural central of the region. It is still one of the oldest and wealthiest cities in the U.C.A.S., and it's based on finance, education, healthcare, and technology. It's home of the East Coast Stock Exchange, and it's been there from around 2029 until after 2064. That's when we know we definitely can date that to. Post that, it's unlikely that it's changed from being home there, but basically it moved from New York to Boston. So it's a good chunk human, of course, as most places are, with elves, dwarves, orcs, trolls, and some others making up their population density. 55% corporate affiliate, and yeah. There was the Awakened Dragon, Iluhan's attack on Neonet's headquarters in the Fenway District, caused a lot of widespread havoc in 2076 and locked down the cities until the situation was resolved. Current mayor is Megan O'Reilly. Yep. The major crash in 2064... Oh, okay. So the East Coast Stock Exchange did move back to New York City after the major crash of 2064. Okay. Even after everything that's happened, still a major technological center. Yep. And civil security contracts are held by Knight Errant Security Services under Ares. In the organized crimes are the O'Reillys, the Muldoons, and the Morales are all mafia families that control Boston. Baltimore. Let's talk about Baltimore a little bit, because it is a large city that still exists. The Johns Hopkins University used to be there. They they lost their university status and renamed it Johns Hopkins Institute of Health and relocated the Caribbean League. Ares Arms is headquartered in Baltimore, which is a subsidiary of Ares Macro Technology. And the Baltimore Orioles are still playing in the baseball league. Elven Ancient still has a chapter in Baltimore. Chicago. Ooh. It was the second largest city in the UCAS, with a huge population of over 4 million, until about 2055, when insect spirit occupation quarantine basically fucked everything else up after that. It's a best example of why the old ways have to kind of be burned down and new rules have to be kind of made. It was a very city of haves and have-nots, the haves winning big time, the have-nots basically starving. You know, it was pretty bad. And then all the bug stuff went down. And, you know, not really great now. The Chicago sprawl area still has about 20 million people in it. So it still is a pretty big area. But, yeah. The extermination has been pretty good. In 2058 it did, so the insect spirits are kind of gone. And integrating zoners with the population of the Chicagolands has been a daunting task over the years. Because zoners, they're suspected of being like insect spirits in disguise or savage gangers. It's just been terrible. The Chicago Metroplex is a lawless area, basically an urban hellhole of gang wars and smugglers and sinless. And there hasn't been a lot of cleanup on Chicago. The O'Hare Airport was given to mega corporations who ensured the airport stayed operation under military control and enforcement. And 2063 recovery of the Calumet Port began, and the 2.0 crash halted that. And the Chicago government since then declared bankruptcy, and most officials retired. So the main areas, the zone, the core, the elevated, the underground, and some neighborhoods that are left over. Pretty much, Chicago is a different place than it was. So the shadows control Chicago by a lot. But it's a big city still. Cleveland. A professional combat team, biker team, the Cleveland Commandos, is in the WCCL Eastern Conference, and successfully led by their coach in 2062 to win. The Cleveland Browns still exist, and the Cleveland Cavaliers still exist too. That's basically what I can tell you about Cleveland. They got a really good combat biker team. Columbus, Ohio. Not a lot about that one. Let me just see. Detroit, we got some stuff, because Detroit is very interesting. It's the Greater Detroit Metroplex Complex. It's in Michigan. And it's the site of the global headquarters of Ares Macro Technology, parent company of Knight Errant Security Service. It is a prosperous and one of the safest cities in the U.C.A.S. It's called, yeah. It has a 2% employment rate as of the 2070 census. So, Detroit is a pretty big success rate when it came to things. Basically, after the UCAS formed, the Canadian city of Windsor became a district of Detroit in the Metroplex in 2032. Ares sponsored a celebration in 2046 of the 150 years of the automobile manufacturing in Detroit, with the completion of the Ford Quadricycle, an experimental motor car built, the first experimental motor... completion of the Ford Quadricycle, an experimental motor car built by Henry Ford in 1896. So they built an experimental car and got it to work. Though, I may note, in 2081, Ares does plan to move their global headquarters to the Canadian American states, the CAS. So it's on the border of the state of Michigan along the Detroit River, the Lake Erie. It stretches north to Sterling Heights, northwest to Pontiac, Dearborn, Plymouth, and of course has Windsor. A recently completed 8-meter-tall wall surrounds the entire Metroplex. They walled in the Metroplex. The Riverside skyline is dominated by Ares Macrotechnology's headquarters. And the headquarters of the Council to Rebuild America is in Detroit, which is a group you can look up, an underworld group. So yeah, that's Detroit. We can talk about Indianapolis a little bit here. Let me just check if there's anything. I can tell you about their professional sports teams, because those are things. Indianapolis Colts in football, Crossroads, the former Pacers in the basketball league, and the Racing Club of Indianapolis, aka Racing Indy of Major League Soccer. That's a weird name for a soccer club. God, Indianapolis, why do you... I don't know if to blame nowadays, which would be nowadays, or future. So Kansas City is a sprawl in U.C.A.S. It's part of the old Kansas City, the capital of North Missouri, while Kansas City, Kansas would be a smaller part. So Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas basically combined into a new Kansas City. They have a baseball team, home to the Sporting Club Kansas City for soccer league. Yep. Kansas City, there you go. Anything for Milwaukee? In 2050, Lone Star Security Service holds a police contract with Milwaukee as one of the, as well as Seattle. It had an academy in Milwaukee. I don't know if Lone Star still exists. Or do they still exist? I know they lost out to... they still have some security contracts. But they've lost out some places. They've lost to Ares. They had a setback in 2071. That's why they lost Seattle. Ooh. Yeah. Oh, that's why. They couldn't get, like, a serial killer. And that's why they lost Seattle. Ooh. Yeah, you know. Sorry, Ares. Sucks to be you. Let's talk briefly about Minneapolis/St. Paul. The Minneapolis-St. Paul sprawl, the MSP, is composed of the two cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, both located in Minnesota, UCAS, at the Mississippi and Missouri River, the Twin Cities. The Twin Cities have basically joined together. Again, a lot of this urban sprawl has meant that cities have become larger because it's the unfortunate thing with a lot of things that happen. Urban sprawl basically drove people together that way. It's a great place for smuggling. Denver is only the second biggest place to smuggle after that. And of course, Denver being a, I think, kind of independent. So yeah, Denver is kind of its own thing, and next to Denver in the North America area, it's the biggest thing for smuggling. So if you want to be a smuggler, go to the MSP. And Don Marco, Fat Cat Cartrone, leads the mafia in the sprawl and controls a lot of the major smuggling route. As long as you don't go on the bad side, he's a good guy to talk with. You know, good old Fat Cat. Yeah, just a little thing there. New York City. The Big Apple. It is still recognized as one of several world cities. It used to be kind of like capital of the world. The United Nations was headquartered there. So was the East Coast Stock Exchange. The East Coast Stock Exchange, of course, has moved back since then. The earthquake, basically, that happened damaged things, so it never recovered. The UN left and went to Geneva, Switzerland during that time. Hasn't come back. Corps have rebuilt the island of Manhattan, the city center, a series of skybreakers and archaeologies towering the skyline. It has the heaviest corporate security in the U.C.A.S., perhaps even in North America. The main Manhattan Island is restricted to not only by sin-carrying citizens, but also by a series of color-coded pass cards issued by municipal government, depending on status as resident, commuting worker, visitor, government official, VIP, etc. Black card passes are issued to convicted criminals and ex-cons. They're constantly cross-checked, and penalties are downright brutal if an individual does not present or possess the correct pass card, especially the face of former convicts. So the city government of Manhattan is not only headed by elected members of city council, but by corporate council of Manhattan, known as Manhattan Incorporated Consortium. Has shares which are owned by mega corporations, and the exact membership has been classified, but most of the Big Ten, you know, the people that are on the corporate council, are pretty much the Chis. Police contracts are handled by 4 security contractors: Lone Star, Windstar Systems, Knight Errant, and NYPD Incorporated. So it's still a pretty big city. There's a lot to go over. I could probably do New York on its own, honestly. And maybe I will. You know, that's one of those things, is just looking at everything that's happened in New York City. And what there is there. It's one of those big cities I certainly could throw out a lot of information and do a lot better research and give you more information. But just remember, oh my god, there's so many pages of stuff. Just in here. Yeah, we'll leave New York, and maybe I will just keep that simple there. Talk about New York, and we'll just say that there might be more to talk about in the future. Certainly a lot of things have happened in New York. There's a lot of places to visit in New York. Long Island, Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx are still all there. Still have a pretty powerful economy. And certainly still have a lot of things to talk about. It does have a large immigrant and metahuman population. It is still very American, is the way to describe New York City. And a lot of different magical traditions can be found there. You can find things from like Buddhist magicians, chaos magicians, Christian theurgists, black magic, Aztec, Islamic mystics, North mystics. Everything can be found there pretty much. And a lot of different meta types and stuff. There are also a lot of ethnic enclaves that do exist, though. And it is about over 30 million people. Oh, as of 2070, 44 million people there. So, giant city. Anyway. Let's move on, though. We'll come back to there. Omaha's a large city. Philadelphia. Can't really say much about Philadelphia, the city near myself. Other than, unfortunately, the Humanist Polyclub is headquartered in Philadelphia. The basically anti-metahuman horrible racists. Thanks, Philadelphia. Maybe they just moved in there because of reasons, but, you know. And they're contracted by Minutemen Security Services, which is a subdivision of Helter Shut Incorporated. And it is actually including the entire sprawl is both the Philadelphia but also Camden. It's the Philadelphia-Camden sprawl. So, similar to the most major cities in this future, how the cities have sprawled out, this one did too, and basically incorporated Camden, which was across the river from them. So the entire sprawl includes that. Sports are still the same. Philadelphia Phillies, the 76ers, the Eagles are still there. The Liberty in Major League Soccer is still there. In 2025, in the Philadelphia Eagles, they were the first to have a player have cyberware replacements. Mario Sanchez played. So that's a thing for fame for Philadelphia, and bringing cybernetics to sports in an interesting way. I guess for more medical reasons and stuff like that, and probably restricted in certain ways. And Exotech Entertainment produced a lot of various sim sets in Philadelphia in their studio in Germantown. And their most successful productions include a series featuring chromatic mages, including The Summoning of Erebeth and The Night of the Enchanter. So there you go. The city is mostly controlled in the underworld by 5 big mob families of New York and New Jersey. There was points that there was also influence of the Mueller family from Washington, D.C., but also then splits apart. The Yakuza control the casino sprawls in Camden, and some areas of Delaware. And so, yeah. So the mob families are there, but also the Yakuza have some influence. And there's a bunch of gangs. The Death Angels, Walking Wounded, Paradise Slayers, Go Gang. That's Philadelphia for you. Pittsburgh still has their Steelers. And Pittsburgh has a huge sports affiliation, even into the 2070s, and it's marked as keeping interest in past fifth world sports like football, baseball, and hockey, and has crossed over into other professional, like combat biking and urban brawl. As much as Pittsburgh was always in for fifth world sports and had a big kind of interest in it, they've also moved into new sixth world sports, with combat biking and urban brawl being very popular there. Pittsburgh is a sports team. Of course, I talked about Seattle. There's also then 3 more cities other than Washington, D.C., which I talked about. St. Louis is a city. It's divided city on the border between the U.C.A.S. and the C.A.S. So St. Louis is divided, which is an interesting part about it. So, yeah. St. Louis is a sandbox of diplomats, members of both intelligence agencies, spies, polyclubbers, political hotheads from the south and from the north. There's interest in a reunification from both sides of St. Louis as a one city, as part of both countries. So, as part of one of the countries, I should really say. So, St. Louis is a very interesting city on that end. Being split in half. It's also a city known for its hellbender population, which is a large aquatic creature. Tiny, it's basically an awakened creature that thrives in the area. Let's get this picture of this hellbender. Sure. We can show this off. I can quickly throw this up here. There you go, there's a hellbender. Enjoy looking at that thing for a second, as that is a large population is in St. Louis. Thanks, St. Louis. They have a baseball team, of course, the Cardinals. Their urban brawl team, the St. Louis Slaughter, is the first team to have a perfect season when they beat the Detroit Nightmares in the first Urban Brawl World Cup in 2046. So the St. Louis Slaughter is pretty famous that way. Originally, the Kowalski family from New Orleans basically had some control of St. Louis, and divided up between the local mob and the Moreno family, from the 1930s. But since the crash, a Renegade Otaku group, the X-Pacs, have kind of moved into the area. And it's a waypoint in smuggling from Seattle to New Orleans is St. Louis. Toronto. Well, Toronto had some food riots in 2048. Pretty bad there. And 2055, a toy manufacturer got involved in smuggling nuclear material. And then there was also a 2074 had a terror cell connected insect spirits activity was discovered there. So Toronto, U.C.A.S, on the north shore of Lake Ontario. It's kind of a collection of metroplex that made up the Lake Ontario ring. Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo / Niagara Falls, and Watertown on the New York side, and Ontario side, Catherine, Niagara Falls, Hamilton, Toronto, and Peterborough. So kind of like their metroplex kind of includes all those areas there. It grew a little bit after the New York earthquake, but yeah. Basically, when the Treaty of Denver was signed, this area saw a huge influx of Canadian expats and made it a boom town. And the Treaty of Richmond saw even more investment. Basically, with the political climate in the U.C.A.S. as it being a new nation, there was some drive and sent some folks up into the area there. And it was far enough away that it felt a little bit safer. So it's a clean, very safe city and has a reputation for being a decent place to live. It doesn't mean that shadows aren't there as other shows, but it has just a different kind of shadow community like as New York or D.C. Finance, matrix tech, and entertainment are their main places. And the city is the third major financial center after Boston and New York. So Toronto is a pretty big city still. And I gotta be honest, I think I could maybe even dive deep into Toronto itself too. There's a lot of information on Toronto. We'll take a look. I'll leave it here at some basics here. You know, with just some information there. And maybe Toronto would be another city to visit and dive deep into as the third largest entertainment center. And of course, Winnipeg, the capital of Manitoba, is also another major city. Minor cities, of course. There's a huge list of them that are still important cities that I can kind of mention. Albany and in New York, Ann Arbor in Michigan, Bismarck in North Dakota, Buffalo, Niagara Falls, which is part of the Toronto Megaplex in New York City, Cincinnati, Daytona, Des Moines, Duluth, Minnesota, Hartford, Connecticut, Louisville, Madison, Wisconsin, Manchester, Portland, Maine, Providence, Quad Cities, Illinois, in Iowa, Rochester, New York, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Springfield, Massachusetts, Syracuse, New York, and Wichita. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, there are a lot of cities that you can look into. And Portland, Maine, I can kind of mention for that, is one of the few metahuman sanctuaries from during the Night of Rage. Basically, Portland continues to have a legacy of that, that no matter what kind of racial unrest there is, they try to be a sanctuary. Though still there's still threats and still fringe groups that exist and will even have influence there. Anyway. So several metahuman polyclubs and for metahuman rights and awakens can be found there. So Portland. Maine. Anyway. And Springfield, Illinois being the state capital, even though it's south of Chicago and still much smaller. And you know, it's one thing. Anyway, yeah. Is that good enough? I think so. We kind of saw that, like, as I was diving deep, there are a couple of places that maybe we'll do on their own. New York City, Toronto. Honestly, maybe I'll do a video on that one separately as cities. That we can deep dive into cities. Maybe even Washington, D.C. I'll make another stab at, kind of diving deeper into it, because, and the federal district around it, because those are very complex areas that kind of define it. Other than those, I don't think there's any major cities to dive into. Like, as much as I'd like to, like, chat about Chicago, it's, if I'm talking about Chicago, I'm not talking about, like, a real place that most characters would kind of live. Certainly, A Shadowrunner might find Chicago a great place to go to and do their job, but it's not a great place to have come from or anything like that. It's just the unfortunate nature of, what happened with the insect spirits. But I hope that's enough if you want to know about kind of the U.C.A.S. It's hard to dive into these countries in such a way that kind of reflects everything that they are. Like, when I name the states, and the states, former provinces, now states of Canada, in the U.C.A.S., it kind of gives you an idea of what's there. Because again, like, as much as a lot of shit has gone down, pointing out how a lot of these cities still retain their historical aspects. Boston, as much as it is like an economic center, it's still Boston. What someone would go to and now see in the historical aspects and the current aspects of Boston, the essence of Boston is still there. The essence of New York City, it's changed a little bit, but there still is some of that New York there. Same with like Washington, Philadelphia. Philadelphia having its own problems, and a lot of places having their own problems, and a lot of things have happened, and there have been major changes, like with St. Louis, city and stuff like that. So there are some places that have been major changes, and seeing like there is that core of what was Seattle and these metroplexes and how they grew. That the thing is, it's like it's not just one city now. It's oftentimes like if I would talk about Philadelphia, a city near me. There's Philadelphia and the suburbs of Philadelphia, which surround it over a long area. It's that the city proper would have expanded greatly, and those suburbs would have spread out even more into the Metroplex area. So, again, New York, all these major cities have their surrounding areas around them that we know about today. That you can say, oh, it's the, suburbs and areas connected with the city that are around it. We've got that even more to an extreme, because it's sort of like, as shit went down, populations basically clung together in a way in these places that kind of kept them safe. It's kind of weird, though, because we did have major plagues that happened, which would have been kind of had the opposite. But the plagues were only one part of everything. And certainly this call to technology has driven things more urban than anything before. And nature becoming honestly more dangerous everywhere. Everything, like, you have to think about the dangers of a natural area in general. If I talk about my natural area, wilderness area, we still can get in certain areas things like poisonous snakes, a couple of poisonous spiders. Black bears can show up, not too close around my area, but could be in certain natural areas that I might travel to. Those things can be dangerous. Now, on the level of that, magic crap, and strange weather, and all this stuff, and natural things going off. Volcanoes in places that they weren't, were earthquakes in areas that you didn't think that they would have happened in. A lot of natural things happening that make it more dangerous, being closer to other people that might be able to help you out, and protections from things like corporations and stuff are more important. And with corporations kind of throwing their power together and making everybody under them basically their citizens too, also means you want to be closer to a lot of those corporate buildings you're working at, aka a move towards urban, or a move towards that kind of urban thing, with megacorps has driven that. So it's interesting to look at the sprawl that's occurred and the evolution, and this is something that occurs across a lot of places in the Sixth World. The U.C.A.S. is a very good example of how everything has evolved and changed, because it's what a lot of people understand a lot. Even non-Americans have a general idea of a lot of, like, some stuff in America. And, like, it's not that I want to say that it's an American-centric world. It's unfortunate there's a lot of that there in the world. And yes, the differences in states, the difference in cities, a lot of people might not know those from a global perspective. From a lot of American perspective, sure. And yes, I'm an American, so I'm getting a lot of that perspective here. And Shadowrun, as it's written, because it was written in English by people in America, would it have worked in other areas of the world? Yes and no. But also the story of the U.C.A.S. is one of, like, folly? So it's an interesting story that, like, I can say it's a America-centric story that's being told in this alternate future, but it's also one of folly and mistakes and loss and a loss of that strength. You have to think about it that, like, the global security network that the U.S. once had, the U.C.A.S. doesn't have. They withdrew from most places. Certainly places like Japan and Europe, where they had a lot of forces that would also be stationed overseas, they're gone. Europe had their Euro wars. Japan has become its own kind of fierce, more imperial state again. Not World War II imperial state, but Japan is another country to talk about, because there's a lot of stuff that's happened there. Honestly, talking about Europe would be a really interesting thing. The U.C.A.S. The Native American nations I might want to do together, except for Aslant, which you do on its own. California has its own things. Hawaii might be interesting to talk about. It's probably not going to be a long one. But a lot of these countries I can point out how they'd be interesting to talk about because they have this unique history and how things have changed and how things stay the same. Because 50 years is a long time. But even in an alternate future, an alternate world where a lot of things happen, the more things change, the more they stay the same a lot of times. It's sort of like, I think if someone from 100 years ago in New York City will look at the New York City of today, there'd be a lot of interesting and different things and changes. But there would be this core essence that still is New York City. A couple more 100 years after that, it might be different, but you know, depending on how far back you go, it starts to really become a difference. Like 50 years. 50 years ago, comparing it to the New York City from 50 years ago to New York City today, certainly someone could recognize the differences between them and recognize it's still New York City. So that's why, like, these places, wherever they are in the world, and you know, when I go more global, they still have that essence of where they were. London's still London. Berlin is still Berlin. Tokyo is still Tokyo. Sydney is still Sydney. You know? Rio de Janeiro is still Rio de Janeiro. Actually might have a different name now. I don't know, because South America had some changes. But I'm just saying, like, in general, it's still the same. Again, cities can change names. Metroplexes can grow. Smaller cities nearby can join with bigger ones to make more larger metroplexes. And yeah, these still areas might consider to be their own kind of independent cities under the bigger one, similar to a lot of places where the suburb areas are kind of independent, but kind of under the influence of it, just because of the natural ability of the city. It's interesting. And of course, again, maybe we'll talk about the DC sprawl, maybe we'll talk about New York, maybe we'll talk about Toronto. I think those are the ones that I would talk about if I dive deep into there. And honestly, I should probably talk about Denver someday, too, just as a city on its own. And maybe there might be something else that I didn't notice in that list. Boston. We can dive deeper into Boston, too. Boston, New York, Toronto, Washington, D.C., Denver. Those are big ones connected to North America that maybe we should dive into. Anyway, I will leave that here for today. I hope you learned something. I hope my little rambling at the end there was informative enough and wasn't too distracting. So, yeah. Hope you learned about the U.C.A.S. And again, there are other books and a lot of places that mention a lot of this stuff. And you can certainly look into it. And the Sixth World has a lot of information that's actually really good to check out. And, you know, it's a lot of interesting things that are really fun to know about. So, I talk tabletop on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, if you want to check it out. I'm going to tell you, honestly, on my schedule, Tuesdays tend to be things like Cough, Shadowrun, and stuff like that. Thursdays tend to be things done by Paizo, Shadowrun, Starfinder. And Saturdays tend to be World of Darkness stuff if you want to see me live on Twitch. If not, these stuff goes up onto YouTube, usually a day or two afterwards, where you can check it out, slightly edited down. I'm probably not going to edit my technical difficulties, because I hope you find that funny, that everything broke in my system there for a little bit. Or not. Maybe I'll cut it out. I don't know. I have to find it. Maybe. I'll figure that out. Anyway, I'd always say follow on Twitch. If you're on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment on the video. There are places to talk on either side. A lot of places to give support. Discord and Twitter, my brain farts, occasional, and schedule go up on when I'm doing things. And that's the basic. And if you're looking for more stuff on Twitch, gaming on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Buccaneers of Shackled Sea, a Pathfinder live play on Wednesday evenings, and discussing tabletop on Saturday evenings for talk show about talks, all this stuff. And a lot of tabletop news of the week. There's my schedule. There's where you can find everything. All right, everybody. More Shadowrun in the future. Hope everybody out there has a great day, and I bid all of you out there a wonderful farewell.